AskReddit. College professors of Reddit, what is the most genius thing you have seen a student do in one of your classes? Not a college professor, but during my Diff EQ class, my math professor told the class a story about an incredible student he had. He liked having both calculation questions, solve the difference, etc., and proofs, testing conceptual things in the class. Well, one time, this incredible student managed to prove things that were well beyond the scope of the course. She would also ask questions that suggested incredible insight into the class. He was impressed and had to see what her math background was. Well, it turned out she was a C and D student. In fact, she failed Calc 3 and got a C, I think, the second time. Her first exam also suggested that she had a very difficult time solving and applying the kinds of things learned in the course, yet she could prove the bonus question extremely well. He realized that she just had a hard time with applied math, but was incredibly gifted at pure math. So he went to the head of the math department and after some fighting, managed to convince the department chair to give her harder exams on the account that the exam must be approved. Well, that's what he did. And the department was astonished at the difficulty of the second exam. She could never complete this, but she did, and she got an A in the course. To this day, he and she are good friends, and she visited the class near the end of the semester. She was doing a pure math PhD. This stuck out to me. Honestly, I don't think she would have pursued mathematics, and that would have been a shame. The professor stood out to me. Not only was he an incredible teacher, but he really cared about his students. This wasn't so much genius as it was ballsy, but in the last class I taught, students were required to give a 10-minute persuasive speech about a topic. I listed some common topics from previous classes like whether college athletes should be paid, legalizing marijuana, stuff like that. They were supposed to do a little bit of research and incorporate empirical evidence into their presentations. This guy did a whole 10-minute speech, complete with a PowerPoint presentation on why one food item was better than another similar food item. It was completely and totally irrelevant, subjective, and not related to anything the course discussed. However, the presentation was very well done. Where students often struggle with the use of filler words, improper preparation, and a flat, boring speaking voice, this student was engaging and seemingly excited about the topic. Because I use a rubric, I told him that I had to take off points for the fact that his research relied mostly on personal opinion rather than evidence. But I still gave him an A- because the actual presentation itself was well done. Honestly, it was one of the better speeches I'd heard that semester, if you don't factor in the content. I had one student who recorded my class and sold the recordings. It's funny that you say it's genius because I've literally had multiple professors put in their syllabus to not do this. I've recorded for personal use though. My property class professor had a pretty crazy note in the syllabus about the laws the class material was protected under and the legal action that would be pursued if we recorded or sold. Former TA. On an exam, a student answered a question about DNA topology with an answer that neither the prof nor I had ever seen, and it was correct, and neither of us had come up with it. And that made us have to go back and regrade the entire class's answers to that question. What was the question and what was the answer? Can a recombination fork advance in this structure? If so, how? We thought the answer was no, but it was yes. And here's how. And we, Prof and I, both did a simultaneous facepalm. Not a professor, but was taking a romantic era lit class in university. Due to some quirk of scheduling, it was twice a week, 6 to 9 p.m. We all had to do presentations for a tiny part of our grade on whatever the topic of the day was throughout the term. We were encouraged to take a very wide-ranging view of what could constitute a presentation. This prof was pretty great and actually managed to get a bunch of 20-year-olds to dress up in period costumes to read poetry to the class or to tell pulpy stories about all the banging the Byrons and or Shelleys got up to. But he was a super friendly guy who had time for everybody. Imagine the personality of Jack Black in the body of a 24-year-old Harry Potter. His day to present comes up, and the poem is Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. At first he doesn't show. The prof goes through the preliminary matters, and then before she can ask where he is, Buddy kicks down the door to the class and struts in with somebody dressed as a fisherman and a woman in a showy prom dress. These people are not in our class. He proceeds to take a literal boombox, this is like 10 years after those stopped being a thing, to the front of the room, plug it in, and start playing the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner metal song by Iron Maiden. We think, okay, cool, this is his presentation. No. The dear reader, this is not what happened. What happened next was a 60+ minute reenactment of the overall story of the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner through a Hunter S. Thompson lens. The woman is initially the guest going to a wedding whom he stops, but then terrorizes her and holds her captive with a reenactment, a presentation within a presentation, with his captain friend about how he killed an albatross in an aviary while pressuring this captain figure into driving him around to score more drugs as things kept spiraling out of control. As this is going on, the girl at first seemed terrified of them, circles around, throws on some dark makeup, and suddenly, with everyone's attention on this weird gonzo reenactment, makes her entrance as Death and his rival from the play, lecturing them for their mortal hubris and both demanding her attention and ignoring her. The metal song stopped playing 15 minutes ago, and the whole class is caught off guard by this reversal when they thought the whole thing was wrapping up after he got to the part in his weird story about the dead bird. But she keeps going in a fury. She throws out the seeing captain and driver, and then she and he finish out the rest of the poem with the mariner receiving his curse. They must have been rehearsing for weeks. There's no reference to anything written down, and they are just living the emotional depths of this reckoning. As they draw to the end, she resumes being the woman waiting for a bus or wedding guest. They finish, take a bow, and the class is part amazed, partly confused, and just beside themselves. There is some scattered applause, then he abruptly takes his boombox and they storm out. I never came back to the class that night. The prof takes a break, pokes her head out to look around, tries to talk about the poem, but she just can't. We've all just witnessed something together, something weird and wonderful and spellbinding. None of us put a stop to it, least of all her. There was nothing left to say about Coleridge. No presentation I have ever experienced in my educational or professional career will ever approach the time I saw a gonzo reimagining or Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner in a lit class. I'm a TA for a chemistry class. Twice a week the students have to turn in a worksheet to me, and I require them to have them stapled because of the mess it turns into otherwise. Anyway, one student made it through the class without buying a stapler because they figured out some weird origami-like way of folding the corners together in such a way that you physically could not get them unstuck without carefully undoing the folds. Now I teach it to my students and tell them if they don't own a stapler, they can just do that. Do you have a picture or something of this? Somehow it sounds like one of those awesome life hacks I want to know. Not me, but I took an intro to accounting class that was required for all business majors, where we had a teacher that was teaching his first college class ever. He said T accounts were for nerdy accounting people and wanted to show everyone how to look at the P&L and balance sheet like a business does. He would assign us things to do, and if you couldn't figure out the answer, he would tell you to reread the chapter. The answer was in there. As you could guess, a ton of kids struggled or had to cheat to get by after the first test. But then there was some kid who had taken accounting before at a different university, and the credits didn't transfer, so he was forced into this class and he knew all the answers. He hosted a homework review in the library on a whiteboard and answered any questions and helped everyone study. I think we all just learned from that dude more than the teacher. Not a professor, but a TA. We had assignments based on the daily lectures in class. Assignments were due at the end of the week, but this one student always turned his assignments in minutes after each class. I noticed on his laptop, while everyone else was taking notes on theirs, he would be filling out the assignment as the professor went through his PowerPoint. He would also ask the professor questions about the lecture that gave him the answers to the assignment. Not only was he learning from essentially taking notes, but he never had to do homework outside of class. Not the professor, I was the student, but he told me no one had ever done this before and he was impressed, so I'll share it. I had a hard time in university. Personal things, won't go into it, but it's relevant to know. I couldn't attend some lectures, and I always requested to work alone for group work due to the problems. As you can imagine, things piled up. I fell behind. Countless emails I ignored from the head of department, and I avoided seeing him for as long as I could. I was studying computer forensics. The head of the department was a nice man, but his introduction had left us all a bit wary of him. He used to be military, and in his words, he was an interrogation expert. He was a giant of a man, so we took him at his word. He told us if you're ever called to the office and he has biscuits on the table, you should be okay. But if there are no biscuits, you're probably going to get shouted at or interrogated. Anyway, when I got called in, there were biscuits on the table. He wasn't wrong about the interrogation expertise because I was very much at ease. After 5 minutes of small talk, he then removed the plates of biscuits, and my heart sank, taking me completely by surprise. I knew I was going to get lambasted for missing lectures. This was before they knew what was going on with me. I already knew before going I was going to be in trouble, but he might understand if I laid everything out for him if I had the chance. I played my hand. I unzipped my bag and took out a pack of biscuits I'd brought with me. I opened them and offered him one. He looked gazumped, like I'd one-upped him and he didn't know what to do. But it bought me 2 minutes. I told him, I know you're going to shout at me, and I really can't handle that at the moment. I'm not doing great and I'm barely holding on. Can I please talk to you before you yell at me? Or words to that effect. He allowed me to explain. After listening to me, he pulled his plate of biscuits out of the drawer and replaced them on his desk. He listened to me and understood I needed help, and referred me to the student mental health team. He later told me no one had ever thought to bring their own biscuits, and it was a smart move. He left after my second year, but from the time I spoke to him until when he left, he checked up on me monthly, asked how class was, if I needed any help, even set it up for me to take my exams in an empty classroom with just him there. Good guy.